All right, so I decided to make a video to just show the process of inserting divs into a grid, into a 6-column grid. I'm going to make another video that's sort of a more advanced video that changes the 6-column grid into a 4-column grid. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to make a video that shows you how to lay out your site on a grid. Most of you, I think, are getting this, but just for an additional resource, I thought this might be a good idea to provide just a real clear video on how to lay out your site onto a grid. So here's what we're starting with. The HTML looks like this. It has no divs inserted into it. You can sort of follow along with the files that are on the website if you'd like, but it just has a bunch of dummy text, and this is what it looks like, right? No styles, just HTML. And what we want to do is we want to turn it into something that looks like this. So a nav bar, and then some content and a sidebar. Okay, so it's very simple layout, but that's what we're doing. That's sort of the goal, the end goal of the video. So let's start with inserting our divs into the correct places and sort of what the process looks like. And as you're watching this, it's important to remember that this is the same process you should be going through as you mark up your own HTML sites. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to determine first, before we do anything, what we want to do is we want to insert what's called a container div. So we insert that immediately after our body opens. Okay, so this is div class container. Delete that, that should not be there. Sorry about that. Div class container. And the container div is a div that contains, it gives us a baseline for all of the content on our page. So we open it immediately after body, as you can see here. And I'll make this a little bigger. And we'll close it immediately before body closes. And I'm just going to put a little comment here. This is where the container div closes. Again, these comments are really nice for just keeping track of your sites as you continue to work on them. Okay, so step one is always div class container. Step two is deciding then how many rows are in our site. Okay, so again, how many rows are we dealing with? So in this case, we have one row for our nav bar and a second row that has two columns, a left column and a right column. And so we've got two rows we're dealing with. And just before I forget, I've created the grid for you. Just to make clear, on the course website, I've created the grid for you under resources. And right now it's a 6-column grid. So right here in the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see it's a 6-column grid, and it's the CSS just for the grid. Right? This is the CSS that just controls the grid. So I'm going to copy that entire CSS. Again, this is already given to you on the website. I'm going to go into my CSS file that's completely blank, and I'm going to paste the entire grid. So this is all the stuff controlling the grid into our CSS file. Okay. Let me do a word wrap really quick. Okay. A couple things I want to point out on this grid. One, we can set the width of the container to whatever we want. Right now I've got it set to 1280. We can set it to 1460, which is a very common width of people's screen resolutions. So you can set the container to whatever you want. And that's what's great about having the container, is that you can customize it for whatever sort of width you want for your entire website. So we can set that, and then a couple other things. This is a 6-column grid. This can be customized. You do not have to, for example, have 2% margins for each column. Right? You can change that. You're just going to have to do the math yourself to determine the width of each row. Okay, the more comfortable you get with it, the easier it'll be for you to sort of understand. Let me quickly walk you through this grid. So this that I've highlighted right here, This allows us to just have columns that display next to each other. So margin left 0. This is just a little piece of code that you have to have in there for your columns to line up correctly. The rest of these are for each width of each column, right? So for a column that spans for a row that spans 6 columns, we have a width of 100%, right? So if this is a 6-column grid, something that spans the entire 6 columns is going to be 100%. Something that spans 5 columns is going to be 80%. Something that spans 4 columns is going to be 66%, so on and so forth. Okay. Again, you can customize the width of those as you see fit. And then the other really important thing to understand is the row. Okay. So all websites are just made up of a series of rows, and inside of each row is a group of columns. So with the row, we've got a few styles that are important to point out. One is clear both. So basically this allows us to start a new row. So we've got these floats on all of our columns. In order to start a new row, we have to insert this line of code called clear both. You can Google it and read more about it if you'd like. And then we have padding 0, margin 0, which allows us to start a row on the left margin, the next row on the left margin of the page. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's all there for you. You can customize as you see fit, but as it is now, we can work with this already existing grid. So it's pretty simple because it's already there for you. Okay, if that didn't make sense to you, just copy and paste the grid in and you're good to go. Okay, so div class container, we've already inserted that into our file. And as you can see, it didn't do anything just yet. So the next step then is how many rows are we dealing with? We already said this, we're dealing with 2 rows. One for our navigation bar and one for these 2 columns. Okay, so let's insert a row div class equals row that wraps around our navigation bar. So our navigation bar begins here, it ends here, so let's close the div right here. And I'm going to put a little comment in here again. Here is where row div closes. So again, we just have a very clear idea of what is happening. Okay, because our nav bar spans all 100% of the width of the website, that's all we need for our nav bar. Just div class row. Okay, so one row is taken care of. The second row is all of this content. So all of this content should be in one row. So let's insert a div class row here where this content begins, and where it ends is here. Okay, so, and I'm also going to put another comment in. This is where row 2 ends. Okay, so we've got 2 rows. One is the navigation bar, and the second is this content that has 2 columns. Okay, so inside of the second row we have 2 columns. This is one column is this CSS box model example, and then the second column is this thing called modern looking dash cool. So what we want to do is we want to determine the width of those 2 columns. So if we look at our final example, on a grid, this is divided into 2 columns, but one is bigger than the other. So one spans 4 columns on a 6-column grid, and one spans 2 columns on a 6-column grid. Okay, so 4 plus 2 equals 6. So let's put the first bit of content in div class 4. Okay, so we said this spans 4 columns. And I'm just going to indent this content so you can see the hierarchy. So div class 4, and I'm going to close the div there, and I'm going to, again, put in a comment. Here is where div class 4 closes, so we're just not confused at all. Okay, so div class 4, and then div class 2. So again, this spans 2 columns, this spans 4 columns, so we want to wrap this content in div class 2, and we're going to close it before the row ends here. And I'm going to comment again, and you should be doing this if you can, because it will save you some confusion in the end. This is where div class 2 ends. Okay, so we've got all of our grid in place. That's it. Okay, so basically 4 steps. 1, insert your container. Step 2, insert your rows. And then within each row, insert your, step 3 and 4 is within each row, insert your columns. Okay, so container, row, column. Container, row, column. Write that down. Okay, so when I refresh this page, we have our layout done. It should look much closer to what our final product is going to look like, and I refresh and it does, right? We've got 1 row of our nav bar and row number 2 with our row 4 and row 2. Okay, we're looking pretty good. Okay, so the reason why this is smaller and centered in the page, you see these margins on the side, because this example, the container width is 1280, and so if I change this to 1280, something should happen. There we go. You refresh, and now it's 1280, and it's looking more like our final version. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have the grid in place, that's the hardest part. So take a deep breath. If you've got that done, congrats. The rest of it is just applying styles to make it look more like a website. So right now it's laid out more like a website, but it still looks like a bunch of default sort of settings. So let's just work from top to bottom. So we want to style our navigation bar like this. There's a couple things we need to do. So 1, we need to get this background color, right? So this background color is important. Again, I showed you this in class, but if you just Google flat UI colors, I use this color, which is concrete. I click it and it says paste me. So I need the background color for my navigation bar to be that color. Okay, so we go back to our HTML and we go, okay, we've got nav. So if we want nav to be that color, let's go to nav in our styles, and let's say background color, and then paste it. So let's refresh, and again, boom, it's looking closer to what we want. Okay. The next thing we can do is, well, it's clear that these bulleted lists don't look anything like these bulleted lists. So right now they're vertical, and we want them horizontal. Okay, so what we can do is we can take a look at our HTML again, and that navigation bar is just a list of links, right? So if that's just a list of links, what we want to do is we want to find the tag, the HTML tag, that is controlling the links and change the styles for those links. Okay, and so how would we do that? One way you could do that is you could just Google it. You could just say how to make navigation bar horizontal. I already know the answer to this, but just to kind of show you how to do some research and figure out the answer, I'm just going to click the first link, So navigation bar equals list of links, so that's good. And there's a couple things that it's showing us to do. That's to remove the bullets, and this is to display them as a block element. So let's try that. So we can go to our list item, and we can say display inline block. And we've got it. Now we have it so that our items are now displaying horizontally and not vertically. W3 Schools just says to do display block. Let's see what happens when that happens. Yeah, that just removes the bullets. We want to do inline block. Okay. So one thing you'll notice is that the height of the color, the background color here, is matching the height of whatever the element is inside of it. And so this is much wider than this. And so what we can do then is we can go back to our nav and we can say, let's make the height 50 pixels. I think that's what it is. And there's no magic number. This should be in your mock-up, or you can just kind of guess and check. But that looks exactly right, 50 pixels, right? Yep. So we've got our nav that way. There's a couple things that we don't have, right? These are blue, they're not the right font, and they're underlined. So a couple things we can do. One is we can remove the underline. So let's remove the underline. The underline is there because that's the default setting for hyperlinks in the browser. So to change the style of a hyperlink, again, we have, and just I talked about this in class, but to read sort of how CSS works, we read from right to left, right? So all hyperlinks are A tags inside of all LI tags, inside of all UL tags, inside of all nav tags. Let's make a change to, okay? So again, just to think about how you're applying your styles, that's important to think about, okay? So nav UL LI A. So in nav UL LI A, let's remove the underline. So to do that, we do text decoration, none. And again, if you just Googled how to remove underline on hyperlink, hyperink, you can, I'm sure there is an answer. And there it is. Text decoration property is mostly used to remove underlines from links. Okay. So there we go. Text decoration none. And let's refresh. And there goes the hyperlinks, right? They're gone. Now we need to make the color the right color. So we want to make the color white. So color white. Okay, we're getting closer. And then the font is Helvetica. So let's change the font. And how would you know how to do that? Google how to change the font in CSS. I already know the answer to this, but again, I'm just showing you how to do that. Font family. The font family of a text is set within the font family property. There you go. Right? So we go back here, go font dash family. And also Sublime Text is really nice for all of you that use Sublime Text. If you just type in font, for example, it'll give you the different CSS styles that automatically populate. So font size, font family. So font family, Helvetica. And let's refresh. Boom. We're good there. Now we're looking really close to what it's supposed to look like. The only thing that we need is we need this to appear. We need some padding in between these items, right? They're like really squished up against each other, right? So what we want to do is we want to insert some padding, but we want to make sure we insert it in the right place. And so we don't want to insert the padding on the UL because that's the entire list itself. We want to insert the padding on the LI because those are the list items. So we can say padding, I think it was 15 pixels. Again, how did I know to put 15 pixels? I just guessed, but that's what it looks like with 15 pixels. Looks great, looks perfect. It looks like this, there's some margin over here. So let's move this all the way over back to the left. So how do we move all of these items all the way over back to the left? Well, first we have to decide what is causing it to move to the right. And I think what's causing it is the default margins on unordered lists. So if we do margin left 0, I think that should take care of it. I'm not positive, but I think it should. Of course it doesn't. Or we can just do left 0. No. Okay. Here's a little tip too. So that was actually a good that happened. It's important to not get caught up on those little things. We'll figure out why that's happening later, but for now let's just leave it. Okay, because you could spend an hour trying to figure out how to move this like 10 pixels to the left, and that would be a really bad waste of time. Okay, so let's move on. For the most part, like we've got 90% of our nav bar looking how it's supposed to look, right? It's really close. Let's now style let's style the headers. So these headers, you can see, have this underline below it. Okay, so that's a really nice sort of simple design choice that divides the content up in your page. So let's go to header 1, because in HTML those are header 1s, right? CSS box model example and modern looking cool. So header 1, let's say border bottom. And how did I know to do border bottom? I Googled it, or you can Google it. So how to underline in CSS. So there's the text decoration property, which is one way to do it. So you can do text decoration underline. I've never actually tried that. Let's try that. Text decoration underline. Refresh. So that's underlined, and that underlines just the actual text itself. It doesn't go all the way to the edge. So if you wanted to just do the text itself, text decoration underline is a good way to do it. If you want to do all the way to the edge of the entire div, we could do border bottom, and then for the border bottom, and again, how would I know how to do this? You could Google it, border bottom in CSS. You can see the syntax for border bottom, right? You need to specify the thickness, so I'm going to say 1 pixel. You need to specify whether it's dotted or solid. I'm going to say dotted, and then you have to specify the color. I'm just going to say gray. I'm going to refresh. There we go. Now we're looking almost exactly like what we're supposed to look like. Pretty much the only other thing I did was I changed the background color of this sidebar, and I made the font white instead of black in this sidebar. Okay, so to do that, we don't want to make the change. So if we look at our HTML, we have this sidebar in a div called div class 2. We don't want to make the change to div class 2 because we might have another div class 2 in the future, right, on another part of our site. So we want to instead make it more specific. So what we can do is we can actually wrap another div for the content itself. So let's call this div class sidebar, and we put that inside of div class 2. Okay, and and I'm going to mark this up again with a comment. This is where div sidebar closes, and you want to do that for all of your content. So we didn't do that up here. I'm just going to call this div class home page content, and then I'm going to indent this, and then I'm going to close it here. So, and then I'm going to comment again. This is where home page content closes, and we're good to go. Okay, so in case we want to make any changes to home page content but not changes to all div class 4s, we can do that. Okay, that's basically what that allows us to do. All right, so now we've got div class sidebar introduced. We can open up a new style in CSS called sidebar. So to do that, we do class by inserting a period and then the word sidebar, because that's the name of our class. And the first thing we want to do is, it looks like this is the same color as our nav bar, right? So let's take our color, background color for our nav bar, and just copy and paste that into our sidebar. And that should work. Perfect. Now what you'll notice is that the background color again defaults to just whatever content is actually in that div. So it stops right here because that's where the content stops. In this example, it goes longer, right? So to override that default style, we can change the height of our sidebar. I don't remember what I changed it to. Let's just try 200 pixels. Again, this is guess and check. Or you'll refer to your wireframes or mockups. Okay, 200. It looks like it's more than 200, right? So let's try 300. And that looks right. Yep. Okay. The other thing is the text in the sidebar is the text in the sidebar is not black, it's white. So if we change this to white, everything should change to white. Yep, perfect. Okay, so that's important to know. Just an important sort of lesson in the way that things cascade, right? So we've got a class called sidebar that has all of this stuff in it. It's got an H1 and a UL in it. And so instead of specifying we want to make this H1 white and we want to make this UL white, if we know we want to make it all white, let's go to the parent, which is sidebar, and make it all white. Okay. And that's pretty much it. It looks like there's some padding, or it looks like, yeah, it looks like there's some padding on the left and the right in this example. So let's add some padding to our sidebar. So padding 15 pixels. Again, how did I know that? I just guessed. That looks like too much padding, and it looks like we don't want padding on the top and the bottom. We just want padding on the left and the right. So again, you can do padding dash left, 15 pixels, padding dash right, 15 pixels, and we can refresh, and then we're looking good. So we're looking almost identical to what we have. The other thing I did show you guys is how do we make this highlighted? So this idea of like, this is the page that you're currently on. Um, so to do that, we can add what's called a current class to our navigation bar. So let's just say this is the home page. We can do li class current on the home page. And then we would have to then change some of the styles for current. Basically, all we did was change the background color, right? So I think I chose this asbestos background color. So we'll go background color asbestos and refresh, and there it is. So now it tells us, oh, hey, we're on the home page. And so you can do that for each of your HTML pages. So let's say you create a page for resume. You would just change this class and you would move this class onto resume, onto a different list item. So let's just say this is resume. Refresh, and now it's resume is highlighted. So you could make sure you're changing that on all of your HTML pages and not leaving it, and it only takes one line of code, right? The class current and the background color changes. Okay. So pretty much that's it. That's sort of just a really quick overview of inserting, inserting. I don't know what I did there. There we go. Inserting the divs onto your grid, and then making some really sort of basic CSS changes to make it look more like a look more like a functional website. So that's what I have for you. Hopefully you found this helpful and not confusing, and hopefully you'll be able to implement this into your own sites.